Hello.
Can you hear us, Ari?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Okay. So we got our audio. We'll have to just do this. Okay.
Okay.
Overcame difficulty 1. Let me get my cameras right here.
Okay.
Sorry for taking a second, man. Good to see you again.
Oh, good. It's good to see you too. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Ari. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Yes,
I'm tired, but I'm fantastic.
I guess you can't technically see me, but I'm gonna fix that real quick.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. And let's see.
I like the new studio. Nice.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I got Pupper Man back here, as you saw.
Yeah.
And let me. I'm gonna mirror real quick so I can throw you up on the TV, Ari. That way we can, because Josh can't see you until I do that. So
You're like all Joe Rogan out. This is crazy.
Man, I've had a couple of small difficulties, as you see, but it is coming together, and I'm playing with doing 2 and 3 camera live streams. So
oh, nice. Okay.
I'm just not there yet. I thought I would be able to do this one today live, but I'm close. I ordered a couple more things that will allow me to basically what you said, to do in a way, my own way, like Joe Rogan does at multicam live stream. Yeah. Actually, he doesn't do live anymore at all. So
yeah.
Okay.
It's all in the edit.
All right, I think we're good now. You can see you can see me up there.
Yeah, he's down there drinking his cup of coffee or water.
Okay.
Knocking it out.
Let's get change. Okay, cool. You can still hear us?
Yep.
All right, perfect. You're coming through the speakers now. Can you hear us? We're good?
All good.
Perfect. All right, cool. All right, man. So sorry for the technical difficulties. Thanks for being patient. It's good to see you again.
That's good to see you.
And again, for people that don't know, I do, like, man, I bring you up in the gym periodically. I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, this was the first guy that was on YouTube, as far as in my universe, it was doing jiu-jitsu, but I wanted to have you on today. I mean, we can obviously are going to talk about jiu-jitsu, but we hit on this with your last appearance about, like, and you have such a passionate approach to trying to get jiu-jitsu integrated into law enforcement training. You are a police officer, you are a jiu-jitsu black belt. And I thought we could talk a lot about Invictus today, where it's like we just hit on that last time. Josh, runs a program here at the gym, Project Warrior, for first responders and law enforcement. He's a chief of one of the biggest institutions in the state we're in. So I figured we could all get together and raise some awareness about this too. So that was kind of my thought.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. I mean, it's been quite the journey. We touched upon it before, Ryan, but I'm just amazed on where it's going. And I love, it's so crazy seeing chiefs of police doing jiu-jitsu. It's like, it's amazing because you don't see it often, right? So I love it. You gotta forget my dog in the background, by the way. Just give me 1 second.
I love puppies. I need to do active speaker view.
Sorry about that. Okay.
You're all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, tell us, Ari, when did you get going? With Invictus? I know we talked about this a little bit on your last appearance, but kind of recap, like, at what point into your training did you become an officer? Like, what was the trajectory on you becoming as passionate as you are about this?
So which one? So when becoming a cop or doing the Invictus thing?
Well, I mean, how did one lead to the other? Like, I mean, obviously you were in law enforcement, and then did you get passionate about jiu-jitsu being in law enforcement after that? Like, what was the order of operations there?
No, so jiu-jitsu came before for me. And I mean, I've been doing the martial arts for 35 years. And I was lucky because a lot of cops, you hear them talk about doing jiu-jitsu and how difficult it is because of shift work. It's like, well, you guys are black belts because you guys did martial arts before going to policing, and now I'm a cop, but I can't do it because of shift work. And as my buddy Chad Lyman always says, you got to do a lot, and then eventually you get there. But I mean, I've been a cop for 7 years. I started late in life. I started at 39/40, and I was already a brown belt at the time. And I was just on the cusp of getting my black belt. So I've been pretty lucky. And I continue to do it. But before I was a cop, I mean, I was training 5 days a week. When I came a cop, then it was like, okay, I've got to figure out my training because it isn't practical. I can't train 5 days a week like I used to for multiple hours a day. So I was like, going to do a lot, going to do it. Here's my schedule. I'm going to do it 2 times a week, or I'm going to do it 3 times a week. And then I just kind of carried on from there. So.
Yeah, I mean, so what were your thoughts like when you went through police academy and stuff? Like when you started, I mean, were you able to integrate the jiu-jitsu that you were currently doing on the job, or there restraints there? What was the department like that you were at? Because I know a lot of this varies from department to department too. I mean, things in who you have in the department that's kind of leading the crusade. But what was use of force and everything like at that time that you were becoming a cop?
So police academies are much like jiu-jitsu academies. They vary where you go and what the instruction is like and what they're teaching. Most of the police academies, I would say, in North America are teaching antiquated technique, old stuff like we're going to knee in the femoral artery, or give me your hands, and so it's a lot of bash jitsu. And it doesn't work, and there's better ways to do it. So I think I mentioned this before, but as the old guard retires, the new guard is coming in that have more training and are doing better. So my experience at the police academy was that type of thing. It's like, hey, this is how you do a weapon retention when you're on the ground. And they were showing stuff that was dangerous, and it didn't work. Like basic Kimura control, as the three of us know, super simple. Someone's trying to grab onto your weapon and just getting good control. Yeah, I mean, but it was like, I remember showing it in class, and everyone on the mat was just like, well, this works way better than what they're showing us. And I'm like, yeah, I know, so it's crazy. So my experience at police academy, the use of force it's like a grade 1 level, and it should be at least starting out at a grade 12 level. And it's really not that hard. On the grade 12 level, it's just, here are the basic concepts. This is going to be efficient. So slowly we're seeing that. And we're seeing more jiu-jitsu black belts, brown belts, and purple belts who are in policing teaching as well. So it's good.
So how long had you been doing? I mean, how long had you been a police officer when you decided to get passionate about starting this organization, Invictus, that you're using? I mean, I've just seen a lot of stuff you put out like that. I was just kind of became aware of it when we did a podcast sometime last year, right? It's probably been close to a year now, but that's when I became aware of I'd seen you and Keith post a little bit in the past, and I know he used to be law enforcement. So I was a little aware, but I didn't know, and I'd heard of Invictus, but I didn't know that was really you were one of the guys behind it. But how did all that come into being?
So my buddy Jason Repsch and I started Invictus in February of 2019. Initially, it was a hashtag movement. It didn't even have a name. So it was just BJJ Make It Mandatory. And so that's our hashtag that we use for everything. And I'm like, well, we can't call our movement BJJ Make It Mandatory. It's a mouthful. It didn't roll off the tongue. So I've basically used the name Invictus, it means unconquerable. And I think it's a great word to use. And it went from there. So we have our Instagram page, and then we started getting more and more followers on our Facebook page. And then we started our website. And in the last, I think since you and I last talked, it's actually really exploded. And there's kind of new programs coming onto the scene. There's something called Adopt a Cop, which you probably have heard of, maybe you haven't, that is basically sponsoring police officers now if they can't afford it. And it's pretty cool. So again, the thing with us is we're not like this single group that is trying to smash out everyone else. We are willing, if you're a group, a police group that does jiu-jitsu or has anything to do with police and jiu-jitsu, we're willing to push your policing agenda. Your group will promote it. Again, we're a collective. We're not a business. So that's the difference.
Hop in here anytime you want, Josh.
So good.
Yeah, you know, like that's when I know Josh and I were talking about this, and you know, having our own community, but it is like we're wanting to network more with communities that are doing things like what you're doing. I know he's talked in the past about Adopt a Cop and other organizations. I had sometime after you were on the podcast, I had Alan Shabaro on of We Defy, right? So there's some great organizations out there for not just law enforcement, for veterans, for, you know, first responders. And, but, you know, particularly like just the passion too, for me has always been there, just like working with some departments and some officers in the past, or training several people that were law enforcement, are law enforcement over the years. You definitely see that they could benefit from having some jiu-jitsu in their life, right?
Yeah. And I love seeing when gyms do that. I mean, like when guys like you are teaching cops, it's amazing. And I always ask, like, do you have police officers at your gym? And the answer is yes or no. And then if it's yes, why are they there? How did you get them there? Are you promoting it, or did they just show up? So, and it's an important question to ask, not only of police officers, but just of your students. Do you personally know who your demographic is? So I'm actually posing that to you right now, Ryan. Do you know who your demographic is? Who do you cater to?
Overall, like everybody in the gym?
Yeah, like who as a business model, I think you have to have that. So
yeah, for sure. So I would say, just generally speaking, if I could put it in one word, I would say families.
Okay.
Right. But I mean, we have over 300 members here. It's a super diverse, like there are so many communities within the community, but you know, for our class, like that Josh runs, it's kind of a conglomerate of, you know, current and former military personnel, law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, like anybody that's, I would say, a civil servant type. You know, like Stephen Kesting, he's a firefighter. You're law enforcement. But anybody who's a civil servant type, like we allow to come and do these classes that we offer, right? So it's like its own community. But like overall, our largest demographics, families. Like we have a lot of parents that train. Like Josh has kids that train, et cetera. So, but that's you know, as a business, like that's our demographic mostly. We're in a college town, but 18 to 25-year-olds are not the most consistent human beings when it comes to long-term stuff like jiu-jitsu.
But when you started out, I mean, for me, when I started my school, my vision was different than it was near the end. You know, so when I started, I was like, I want to have 18 to 25-year-olds who want to be world champions, who want to win medals.
Fighters.
Of course, right? And that was the thing, because it's your ego is invested. And then as you get older, I'm 47 now. So I'm just like, what am I thinking? Like, I want to cater to regular people. I want to make regular people tough people. I don't want tough people coming in because they're already tough. And so the quote I always use is, you may not be tough when you start jiu-jitsu, but I assure you that by the end of it, you will be. And it does. It makes you really resilient. So that's who I wanted. And that's kind of where I shaped it. And the next thing is, you look at your gym and you go, are you trying to make world champions? Do you want your entire gym to be competition people? Or is it families? Is it regular people? Is it self-defense? So that's why the demographic, I think, is super important.
Yeah, for real.
So just kind of pick your brain area, if this is cool with you, so you say you're a collective for the Invictus thing. I just want to ask a question. So do y'all have any in your collective? Are y'all the BJJ Make It Mandatory, which I support 100%. Let's just throw that out there. What's your what's your thoughts on, how do you integrate BJJ across the spectrum, like from your academy days all the way up to how do you make it mandatory, and how do you keep it flowing through their patrol, the different areas they go to, like detectives or specialized units, and how do you see that, or is there something out there that you have? I saw the Marietta, Georgia thing where you interviewed the police chief over there, and I saw where they make it mandatory at other departments to do that, and then we talked to several people around that have it at their department. Is there something that you would recommend, or do you have a vision for that, so to speak?
Well, that's the $64,000 question right there. It's like, how do you make it mandatory, and how do you get people involved? I mean, that's an awesome question, and it's a huge question. It's like me saying, what is martial arts? It's like, where do I even start? So you can harp all you want to your fellow officers and say, you must do jiu-jitsu, you should do jiu-jitsu, it's going to save your life. But most of them won't believe it because of a variety of excuses. And the three of us know there are a lot of excuses in the martial arts. Couple that with when you're doing police work, it's even more difficult because of shift work, because of family, because of all these things. Again, something I've said in all the podcasts that I ever do is confirmation bias for police officers is huge, which basically is, nothing bad has ever happened to me in the past, so nothing bad will happen in the future. So, my force presence, my taser, I've been good. So why would I expend energy in learning something that I may or may not use? So I just say, well, why do we train firearms? I mean, most police officers never get into an officer-involved shooting. Why are we training that? For that one day, You don't choose the day chooses you. So you have to have that in your mind. And the benefits outside of, the jiu-jitsu, we know that PTSD is a real thing for a lot of different people, stress, mental illness, all these things. And jiu-jitsu obviously helps that. It's a healthy lifestyle as well. You need to have all these things. Policing is a physical job. And what do we do when we arrest people? We physically go hands-on to control another person who doesn't want to be controlled. I have yet to see, I'm sure it's out there, a police officer high kick people in the head to take them into custody.
What about Walker, Texas Ranger, man? I've been rewatching the original.
Different. Like he's allowed to do that, but everyone else, you can't do it, right? So, Josh, we know that the optics of punching and striking and stuff like that, although sometimes effective, is not the best way of doing things, and we need efficiency. So patrol members, I think, need it the most because we're on the street the most. Do detectives need it? Yeah, sure they do, because they may come back to the street, but it's going to help them in those different areas, which I talked about. So it is a slow process. And this goes for everyone in jiu-jitsu. The hardest thing in jiu-jitsu is walking through the door of an academy. Mm-hmm. That is the first thing, because the barriers are immense and the excuses are immense. So I'm sure I can make a meme with all these names over a door, like, you don't need it, or couch time, or TV program, or food, or soccer, or whatever. And they're barriers. So you have to get right with the world. And I can talk about jiu-jitsu until I'm blue in the face, but the internal motivation is what someone needs. When I talk to every cop that does jiu-jitsu, there's a little fire inside of them that says, yeah, it was time. And then when you talk to them afterwards, it's like, why didn't I start this 10 years ago? So.
Yeah. But also I think, we were talking about, how do you get jiu-jitsu into policing, because we've done it at our department where we've offered money, right? So, hey, if you come and you train, we have this time set aside 2 times because we work 12-hour shifts. So on Thursday and Friday, show up for 2 hours and you can get paid to come to work, right? Yeah. And you have little to no response. Like our DT instructors will show up, but then you have nobody else shows up. I personally think that if you're going to push forward the thing, just from an administrative standpoint, from a chief's point of view, I see it as something that you have to integrate into your department, but I think you also need to do something a little bit better on the front end as well. How long is y'all's police academy up there? Don't mind me asking.
Our police academy, it's changed because COVID has changed it, which is really weird. But so it's 3 months initially at the academy, and then you're typically 3 to 5 months on the road as training with the FTO, and then you go back to the academy for another 2 months, and then you obviously come back to the road, and then that's when you're full time. So yeah, that's our process. What's it like for you?
So ours is less. So basically our academy is only like 14 weeks. And then if you go to a department, you may or may not get an FTO program depending on where you go in the state, right? So for
Wow.
our officers, yeah. So there's really not a state standard for that. And I think that's when I talk to other chiefs from around the state and around the country, I kind of hear the same thing. And a lot of it boils down to like, how big is your department? What have you been involved in? You know, because most chief of police are looking at risk management, right? Like how do we manage risk at our department? So we put a policy in place. This is what you're supposed to do. You act outside that policy. We're not liable for what you do, right? That's where a lot of that kind of comes forward. But our academy is pretty short, and so we're looking at doing a program here to kind of push it out. Is, you know, we think that, or I think, I'll say that I think that if we could produce a better academy, because it's threefold, right? I think number one, on the front end, we need to integrate it into a more robust program. And so at the university, we're working on a 2-year degree program where you'll spend 4 semesters, an ROTC type program where you do PT in the morning for an hour for college credit, and then you do a class for 3-hour credit each semester that's law enforcement related, and then you do a 3-hour lab each week that's procedural. So that a lot idea that you're talking about. So you do that for 2 years, and then you go to the academy. And so the academy becomes a place where you're not going to learn how to be a cop, you're kind of going there to hone your skills. And at the end of the day, we're trying to produce a better officer on the front end, so that when they get out of the academy, they've got a 2-year associate's degree. So they've also got the ability to do some other stuff, but they've also been trained in leadership techniques, as well as like communication, government, all the stuff you need for like a basic education. Then throw in your 15-week academy. Plus they've also got 2 years of 3-hour classes they take for 15 weeks straight. And then you've got your week, or offer a few week intensive classes as well. So like an active shooter 40-hour class, driving, all that good stuff to kind of get a better product on the front end. So by the time you go to a department, all they really got to do is train you on what's our procedures of this department to be successful, right? What do you expect of me as a cop, and how does that look? And then jiu-jitsu being a part of that, you know, that's one of the things that I'm really looking at is like, so after 2.5 years, how do I get it to where I can hand that officer a blue belt? Like, hey, thanks for being here for 2.5 years. You've done great. You've done all the DT stuff. You've done the jiu-jitsu stuff. Here's a blue belt and a certificate of completion along with the associate's degree, right? So produce a better officer. And then I think, you know, but once they get past that, you know, we could do a great job on the front end. But when they get to the department, you know, all the excuses, right? Like, I don't have time, I can't do it. You know, if for departments to integrate that into their department, you almost need like that extra shift, to where the military, I think, does a good job. They basically train you up, send you overseas, and you rotate back to the state, get a couple training. So I think that if you funded police departments more personally, and you had it where you had an extra shift, so every 4th week or every 5th week, I rotate to a 40-hour training block. So every month or 2 months, I'm getting 40 hours of training. That includes all your hands-on practicals, all your stuff, but then it's required because, you know, I've read your papers about the excuses why people don't do it, and I read the stuff you've produced, and I see that 100%. And I think one of the best ways for us as police chiefs or administrators of departments is we need to find a way to integrate that into like the lifestyle, the culture, or how we do business, right? So if I know I'm going to work the street for 4 weeks, then every 5th week I rotate to a 40-hour training, right? That extra shift idea. And then the problem with that, it takes a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing is that, so Jake was saying at Marietta that it starts at the academy level. So Josh, you're right. Like you have to get them early. Trying to work on a 15 or 20-year veteran and tell them they need to change is pretty difficult. You know, you have to be pretty self-aware. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, because it does, but if you get them at the academy, that's where it is at. And the other thing you pointed out, we are doing a disservice to the members of policing if they are not getting proper training. And I mean that from everything from legal standpoint, conflict resolution. And that's why you see so much shit. These cops are coming in, and you know, you can't blame a 22-year-old cop coming in who's got only, you know, a couple months of training on the road by themselves, and then they're in a use of force incident and it's gone horribly wrong because they don't know, and their training is not very good. They can't articulate why they did what they did, and then you're in a shitstorm as a police chief in a department. So
yeah, and also I'd add to that just the fact of the matter, like I think it's unreasonable to be 6 months of training and then expect you to make a life and death decision that affects the lives of somebody else. That's a tall order.
Yeah.
as a police officer, right?
Yep.
And you know, the use of, are you familiar with the Force Science Institute and the stuff
Yep.
they do? Okay, so I've been to several other classes. I like it. They did a study I thought was interesting, and they basically pointed out that if an officer gets more reality-based training scenarios, they are less likely to be involved in a use of force incident, right? So they did a study where they had officers go through 10 scenarios and officers go through 100. And then they basically looked at the groups, and at the end of it, they said, hey, this group that had 10 scenarios has a higher use of force higher rate of use of force,
yeah,
as opposed to the people that had 100. And I think that ties into our jiu-jitsu world pretty strongly, because the officer that spends more time on the mat spends more time doing the jiu-jitsu. When they get on the street, it seems like, I don't know, from my perspective and looking at the stats, it seems like the people that are better trained have a lower rate of use of force incidences. And I think part of that's just because they see it and know how to react better. And like you said, they're educated and trained to respond better. So as a police chief, how do you make that a part of your culture to where you can make that a way we do business, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we produce a better product for the people we're charged to serve and protect as police officers? You know, what's the end goal there? And so I love the Marietta, Georgia, man. I thought that was amazing. So I really appreciate that. And then I forget his name, but the Sandman, I think he's on the Invictus.
Oh yeah, John.
Yeah. I like watching his posts and what he's doing, and then seeing what Chad's doing with his Code 4 concepts. I think that's fabulous. I can't say enough good stuff about that. What y'all have going on. I'm super excited about it. But it's also paving the way for people in my position to say, hey, Georgia's doing it. Why can't Arkansas do it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Here's a thought. Like, do you, and I think it's something you guys can answer, to something I'm thinking about sitting here talking with y'all, listening to, is, you know, do you run into pushback from this older generation in terms of, like, I mean, obviously we see the value in jiu-jitsu, but there's a weird dichotomy even for me in that, yes, it makes common sense, total sense to me that the more I know of hands-on jiu-jitsu tactics, strategies, if I'm competent in that area, you know, I'll maybe not resort to my sidearm first in some instances where that might be taking place. But do you guys run into, like, people saying, like, well, yeah, you know, you guys are obviously biased towards jiu-jitsu, you know, like it's more complex, because that's something I run into when I'm just raising basic awareness. Is not really an excuse. It's more like, well, you know, when you're going you're never going to know, because you're never going to go hands-on with somebody, and, you know, you have to resort to this because you don't know if they have a weapon, and you're just biased because you train jiu-jitsu. I've ran into a fair amount of that just in casual conversation. Like, what about, like, where are you guys with that crowd?
So I'll just, this is a statement I'll make on that is, like, so I've got several evaluations when I was a patrol officer that there's instances that we went to that I was able to de-escalate through communication skills as opposed to going hands-on. But I think part of that is, and Ari can maybe speak more to this, is in our profession, there's people we work with that you're glad they show up on calls. And then there's people you work with that you really don't want them to be there because you know it's about to go for the bad. And I think doing jiu-jitsu, doing martial arts, being more confident in your ability to control or go hands-on with a suspect makes it okay for you to talk to somebody, right? A lot of times we get this attitude in our profession where you walk up and you kind of point to your badge and go, I'm the police, by God, you're going to do what I tell you to do. This is how it's going to be, right? When you approach it with that situation, that person's going to have a higher rate of use of force incidences than the guy that's willing to go out there, confident in his abilities, can do what he needs to do to perform his tasks. And if he goes hands-on, he's like, okay, I'm going to handle it. And I think a lot of that just boils down to the mat time helps because it gets you confident in what you can do. So you're able to look at other avenues, right? And it kind of gets you, like, we always say, like, check your ego at the door at the gym, right? I think a lot of police officers need to check their ego before they go to work a lot of times, because that would make it a lot, to me, that's something we run into. And Ari, I don't know your thoughts or comments on that question.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up a point, which is talking about when officers show up and then you know that they're trained or they have an ability. There's a unspoken language that we have. So if I was at a call and I saw a fellow police officer who had jiu-jitsu who showed up, there's a language, unspoken language there. I know what they're capable of. I know that they know how the body moves. I know they understand leverage and all these things. And And honestly, I would love, I don't think this is, I mean, Marietta did that stat where officers who knew jiu-jitsu were less likely to be involved in use of force incidents. And they were also less likely to injure a suspect or being injured. I mean, these are all things that we know, but administrators have to actually see the hard numbers because they're number people, right? It's like, well, show us the science behind it. And you do get this ego where people are like, well, you need to use your tool belt, or that jujitsu stuff or that hands-on stuff it's like, why would I even touch somebody, or things like that. And it doesn't, their arguments aren't very good because we touch people all the time. You know, like I said, if we're arresting people, that's how we do it. You can't put a taser on the ground and talk to the taser and say, can you please arrest this person, put them in handcuffs? It is a tool to get them into handcuffs. And how do you do it? You go hands-on, and that's what you do. So you need these, right? Tools are fantastic, but the hands is where it's at. And if you're going to be a responsible police officer, your use of force options have to include a super large section of hands-on stuff. So we have this, which is talking, conflict resolution, which is great. And most officers do it 95% of the time. And then everything in between there, from compliant handcuffing to actually lethal force, can also include jiu-jitsu. But if you take that out of the equation, after talking, what is there? OC spray, baton, taser, firearm. So that doesn't make sense to me if you're missing this huge chunk in between.
Yeah. And I think our decisions response, you know, like one thing that we talk about a lot of times is that, you know, when the adrenaline hits, your ability to make good quality decisions kind of goes down the tube.
Yeah.
So the more, so the more you do jiu-jitsu, the more you do training, or you run, or you're physically fit, you're used to that higher heart rate. So you can make some better decisions when you're under stress, especially. You know, that's been shown statistically throughout the lots of studies. But, you know, it's like you're saying, you know, so I'm a DT instructor. I'm sure you do the same thing. It's fun. It's fun to teach people how to arrest people, right? But, you know, when we teach this idea of we also responsible for use of force reviews. So we review all use of forces that come through. And I'd like to see a study on the trend of the over reliance of the taser, right? I think the new people coming up, they're more apt to tase you if you say, I'm not going to jail. Okay, yeah. Taser, right? Tase, good, run the light in. Woo, that was easy. Didn't have to touch him, and I got to put him on there. But I think you're right on the hand control, and people not having confident ability to do that. But I think as an institution, or as an organization, you know, you've got to have officers out there that are confident in their ability to do what they need to do. And the biggest problem we have, I think, as an institution for a lot of us, is just our resources, right? Like, you're a 7-year officer, right, Ari? Is there any specialized units you go to, or anything you do?
I'm actually coming off patrol. I've been on patrol for a long time. So I'm coming off patrol and moving to our domestic violence unit. So that's going to happen in the summer. But I mean, we have different units, just like every other department. Yeah.
You ever thought about training?
Like DT?
No, training. I think when we talk about training, I think everything ties in, like how we do our jiu-jitsu, how you do your firearms, how you do your arrest procedures, how you do your conflict resolution, how you do all your de-escalation. I think it's a total picture that you have to teach from a training aspect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And I mean, I'm an FTO as well. So again, we just talked about it. It starts at that level with the recruits and trying to indoctrinate them and send the thing, that message. And here's the thing. We are talking right now. So everyone who's listening to your podcast is probably a jiu-jitsu person, or they like jiu-jitsu or something like that. The people who don't like jiu-jitsu, don't know anything about it, or not cops, are just kind of going, well, I don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't apply to me. But then let's just say, hey, what happens if there's a police officer listening to this podcast that doesn't do jiu-jitsu, and they're listening to these 3 guys sitting around a table harping on about it, and they're rolling their eyes and they go, oh God, I'm tired of hearing this bullshit, because, I've never needed it. Like, what is wrong with these guys? Like, come on, the old way is still the way. And I would say that this is not the way. So if we're going to take a Mandalorian thing, this is not the way. We have to change.
Well, and so just so you know, on our end, what we're doing in Arkansas, or what we have going on ours, is we're actually working with the local police academy for the state. and we're integrating that degree program I talked to you about. And so we're hoping our institution is the first institution in the state to do that model. Now,
awesome.
Granted, it's going to be a 5-year, so we'll have like 2 years before our first, if you want to call them products or people hit the market, right? But hopefully in about 5 years, that'll be permeated throughout the state. And I hope it creates a new standard. Does that make sense? And so if you got a guy that has 2.5 years of training under his belt and he goes to a department, he's like, hey, when do we train? And you start asking questions like that, that's going to change the organization and culture of that department and maybe seek out other opportunities to do that. And then y'all's Invictus site with the certified gyms, I think is great because it gives the opportunity to say, hey, if you want to train, here's some places to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think it opens up that avenue as well after the academy. So I'm hoping it's a good model and I hope it works out well, but I think you catch them on the front end. I think the other issue we face as police, just kind of throwing it out there, is that we take people that have been patrol officers for 10 years and go, hey, you're going to be the police chief. Okay, here's your budget of $7 million. Have fun. And then you're like, I've never done human resources in my life. All of a sudden you're doing budget, human resources, and all that. I think our administration of these departments need better training. And I'm going to take a punch to the face over this probably, but at the end of the day, the people that sit at the top, we're not adequately trained to do our job because we've basically been running the streets for a couple of years. And next thing you know, you're like, hey, I'm a police chief. What's a budget? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And the one thing I like hearing from you and seeing other chiefs that talk about this is I think the best run departments are police chiefs that have a connection with their officers. There's a division that happens between administration and patrol members or cops that creates a distance between the two. So when you know your officers' names, when you train with them, when you're just a regular person, because we're all people in the end, that I think that helps morale. And your officers want to train and they want to listen to the chief because they know the chief has their back. When a chief has their members' backs, the feel in the department is way different than if that's not the case. And we know this.
Yeah, also, I'd add to that, I've been through several police chiefs in my time.
Mm-hmm.
So I started back in 2003 as a cop and started martial arts in 96, or serious martial arts, if you want to say 96. I didn't discover Jiu Jitsu until 2015 when Brian rolled me up like a wet sock. Yeah. But anyways, different. It's a different story for another time. But at the end of the day, we talk about chiefs, the best chiefs I've ever served under have been like former SWAT operators or people that are high level tacticians or tactical operators in the department, right? Because I've always had a better relationship with them, and it seems like they've always understood better the patrol function than a chief that just kind of came up through the ranks, patrol, went over here, went here, and just kind of shot to the top super quick. It seems like they lost that feel for what it is to be. I agree with you. They lost that feel of what it is to be an officer, and so that's been my experience, just personal experience. I don't have any data to back that up, but
yeah. You bring up a good point, and I want Brian to talk about this. So you said that in 2015, you started doing jiu-jitsu and you had a prior martial art experience. So Josh, you and I have a similar background, both Aikido practitioners. So I had a very similar experience. I was already a black belt when I discovered jiu-jitsu for the first time. And it was the same thing. I'm like, why isn't this working? But I already knew that. And this is not a trash talking Aikido, because there's too many jiu-jitsu guys that do it. And I think it's undeserved. And I will state on record now that I've used Aikido techniques many, many times in my policing career that have worked wonderfully well. And the reason they work wonderfully well is because understand joint manipulation and movement and stuff like that. Steven Seagal, unfortunately, has placed I'm trying to be, I don't have to be politically correct, but he's fucked up Aikido in many ways because of just how odd he is. But he also brought it to the forefront. I mean, that's how I discovered it in 87 when Above the Law came out. And I'm like, I have to do this martial art because it was awesome. But I use it. I integrate it into my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My Aikido led me to Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, which I use all the time, also integrate into my BJJ. And I think that they are a wonderful complement to one another. So I'm not saying that Aikido is the end-all be-all. I'm also saying that Jiu-Jitsu is not the end-all be-all. So you have to make sure that you know all your ranges. You have to understand manipulation. The one thing that we're trying to do, and you'll see like Jay Wadsworth and Chad Lyman also doing this, is they are looking at jiu-jitsu from a police combative perspective. They're integrating jiu-jitsu with weapon retention, with wrestling, judo, and all these things. And that's how it should actually be done. I mean, the original concept of jiu-jitsu was all of these things, but unfortunately, BJJ kind of pushed it in this thing. It's like, well, BJJ is all groundwork. And I'm like, no, it isn't. So my particular lineage is Keith Owen, Pedro Sauer, Elio Gracie. So there's a huge self-defense aspect to it. And Pedro Sauer always says, you know, there's black belts in Brazil that don't know any self-defense. And we're like, what? And he's like, yeah, they don't know any of the self-defense aspects of the art. It's all sport jiu-jitsu. And there's nothing wrong with sport jiu-jitsu. It's amazing, but very interesting.
So I have a Aikido background and a judo background in jiu-jitsu, and we did some weapon stuff, but the self-defense aspect of it. So I didn't just go to 2015. So I was an officer since 2003. So I got to see judo work on the street, and I had a ground game for judo, but I never had any. I'm one of those guys. You never had any issues on the street when you went to arrest somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, hey, everything worked out great. Slam them down really hard, put them in handcuffs quick, throw them back in the car, and go get a cup of coffee. Right. And Aikido was great because Aikido does work on the street. I've used it several times on people, and it's been a great tool in the tool belt. But Jiu-Jitsu just opened my eyes up to a lot of different stuff, and it's been a great complement to what we do because, you know, I'm just going to say, like at Brian's school, when we're up there working at Forza, you know, it's not just Jiu-Jitsu, it's wrestling, it's judo, it's Muay Thai, it's kickboxing, it's all these arts thrown in together, and you can get such a broad range of arts, right? It's not just Jiu-Jitsu. And then when you add the self-defense aspect of it, like the Hickson Gracie, the Self-Defense University, that type of stuff, and you kind of go down that road. And then we do a lot of knife stuff like Craig Douglas and all that stuff. We pursue a lot of those things.
Awesome.
And, the DT program we use is a SSGT, which is a guy named Johnny Lee Smith, who's like a 5th degree under Machado. He was one of the first brown belts under Hickson back in the day, long time ago. And then his student Daniel O'Brien, they run the SSGT program, so it's a jiu-jitsu based martial arts deal too, and that's what we teach for DT. And I appreciate how he teaches it because it works real well. But it's like, I think there's a complete picture there, right? It's great to have all your backgrounds, but being able to tie all your stuff together, I think is critical, especially as an officer. You know, tying all your stuff together from your DT to your firearms to your ability to communicate, having that complete package and understanding what's going on, I think is what we need more of out there.
So I want to pose a question to both of you. So this is a book question. So Brian, I'm going to ask you, what was the first influential martial art book that you picked up that you can remember?
Oh, it would have definitely been an Eddie Bravo book.
Yeah.
Because I just felt like at the time his books were everywhere. I mean, this would have been in the same era of time that you were putting stuff on Submissions 101. So like that was the #1 video resource on YouTube. And then it had to have been Mastering Jiu-Jitsu by Eddie Bravo. And then Kodokan Judo pretty early on. Marcelo Garcia's X-Guard pretty early on. I did an X-Guard seminar as a white belt in like 2007.
Yeah.
You know, but it was, you know, I got Eddie's books real early. I mean, mine are over here on the shelf. And really, honestly, man, I might have heard about Eddie Bravo's stuff on your videos. Like, that's probably the order of operations, honestly.
Yeah. Great books.
Yeah. I mean, they really are. And I felt like he was just, they were different. They were unique.
Yeah.
Not to take anything away, I have a whole bookshelf full of martial arts books over here, but I mean, and that's a big part too. And I think like back on that biases thing that we're sort of path we're on earlier is like, you know, everybody does have their biases, but I mean, all of us, same thing. I'm working with an Aikido guy tomorrow that was the national champion of the Philippines in judo, and he's got this big Aikido background and does Wing Chun. I have 2 Wing Chun dummies, and like we all are talking about all these different arts that we study, and we do have an open mind. I think the bias is really more so just about doing what works. Like we used to like have a dedicated judo class. Now we just do like John Donaher. We're just doing the judo in the jiu-jitsu class, you know, Ouchigari. We did it last night, right? Taught it just like, but instead of just being a jiu-jitsu academy that does not do takedowns, we just do the take. It's just a part of the class, you know,
Right.
like, and I mean, that whether that's Japanese jiu-jitsu that I've trained with some of my instructors who, like one of my coaches, my jiu-jitsu coach has a big background in Japanese jiu-jitsu. Josh and I have trained with him, and it's like, and he trains SWAT and in other groups in our state capital. So, but I mean, it's, you know, I do have a really open mind. I want to study what works. That's why I have books on the shelf, you know, and I've always tried to have an open mind about that because, you know, I've found over the years that, like, even though people might talk shit about something, it might also work. And we're talking to you, Joe Rogan, if you listen to this. Because he's come down real hard on Aikido, right? And he's also come down hard on chiropractic care and all sorts of stuff. It's his podcast to say what he wants. But I mean, literally, like, why would you? I mean, Hickson has a black belt in Aikido and Judo. Why? Maybe that should tell us something. Like, oh, Ari does Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Andy also does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Andy's also law enforcement. I bet he does that for a reason. I'm sure he's not just wasting time, you know? And I don't know. I feel like that's some perceptions that are out there. It does kind of bug me because I've always really, I mean, I'm training Taekwondo with my same jiu-jitsu. He's Taekwondo background his whole life, and I'm like, well, I'll just learn the patterns and give me something to do. You know, I'm interested. It will make my kicks better out here. Let's see what's up, right? So. But, you know, I wish there's more of that attitude in departments as well. And two, that this is to hit on something from Joe Rogan's podcast with Jocko, one of the last times he was on. You know, he talked about a culture in which law enforcement train essentially on the job, maybe an hour a day or whatever, like we would all three do. We would all go train jiu-jitsu every day, you know, like that's part of life. We would seek the martial arts path, whether it was jiu-jitsu or not, right? We would go train. You know, here's something I've thought about. Like, I was joking around about going hands-on with somebody. Like my cousin needed to evict somebody from one of his properties. I was like, yeah, we shouldn't do that because we might get injured, you know? But I mean, that's something I think about too, or have been thinking about recently. It's not something I always took into consideration, but like just to go from like riding around in your police car to like an adrenalized situation, going hands-on with somebody who is resisting, maybe say they sucker punch you, whatever. And you know, getting like, I mean, I feel like you almost have to be doing it daily, something, exercising to keep your body in a state like where you can do that and not like, I mean, I've blown my back out sneezing before, you know, like, you know, so, but, and it's like, maybe that's from doing jiu-jitsu. Here we are with our biases again, but it's an interesting, that's something I'm like, man, you know, it is a liability. There are liabilities there for departments. I get that, but it's like, it's also a liability to have them not working on their bodies and then ask them to go hands-on. And then they do take early retirement or disability or whatever on down the line. Like, you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, there's more risk of not doing than doing. And I would agree with you. And the benefits outweigh the risks for training, whatever your training is. So, you know, I think it's pretty simple there.
Yeah. And the thing about our job that's interesting is like, if you're a competitor for jiu-jitsu, you got like a 10-week period where you're prepping, right? If you're a cop and you know you're going to fight next Tuesday at 3:00 on that call, then yeah, we'll be ready for it. You know what I'm saying? But that constant state of readiness, because you'll go from sitting in a car, stepping out of a car on a traffic stop, a dude all of a sudden jumps out of the car. Hey, dude, can you wait a second? I got to stretch before we get into this. And that's not the reality of the situation. And you know, it's a different attitude. I think you have to adopt in our profession as far as your mental state of readiness, preparedness, and being kind of switched on when you're on duty, right? Which there's a whole that's a whole other discussion, I think. But there's just a lot of stuff going on there.
That's a great point. And so, Josh, what is? I just want to go back because I'm curious. What was your first book? What's your go-to book?
So, okay, so there's several, but I guess if I'm going to start like at the early times, so I did and when I was in college, I started studying the martial arts more heavily, and so a book that I really enjoyed was The Three Budo Masters. You ever read that one? It's like about Funakoshi, Yushiba, and Jigoro Kano, and it basically talked about their life, and there was like a biography of the 3 most influential martial arts masters at the time and their different arts. Right, this is before the UFC came out, obviously, but it was a good book for me. And then from there, the Kodokan Judo book. That's the one I went to, my go-to for studying in the martial arts. And then Aikido, there were several books they gave me, but right now, there really wasn't one that was, because there really wasn't a lot of books out there that were like, oh, this is how you do this throw in Aikido. It was all more philosophical, not very technique driven. But
yeah,
those are some books that I used to go to. Now, when I became a jiu-jitsu guy, Brian gave me Galvo's book on how to train, and I read that, and I still have it and read it on a regular basis. And then he gives me all these other books he recommends, and I follow suit with them. And it's just been, I don't know how to really explain it. My early martial arts career was more philosophical, if that makes sense, because you're doing Aikido, it's all spiritual, and the guys that we're hanging out with wanted you to sing Kumbaya and chant in circles and stuff, and then do Aikido, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate Brian's gym.
Here's one too. I would say, Ari, like, I was building the gym while going to college, getting a master's degree, researching martial arts history. So like a lot of the books I was doing on martial arts too during that time, like through all my belts, were like about the history and about writing my thesis. But at that time, because I was working at the history department and my gym it didn't have 300 members. It wasn't 8,000 square feet. At one point I split room at this karate place, right? There's a lot of resources I couldn't afford until like the last few years, like the Gracie Master Text. I remember there were certain resources I tell my students all the time. I'm like, I could never afford this until 5 years ago, or whatever. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I've got Josh a copy of that for Christmas just because I was like, he has to have it. I had to have it. I had to have Greg Nelson's clinch, all 5 parts, But it is, it's, and then we live in this era where like BJJ fanatics, and I mean, whereas I got exposed to Keith Owen on your page, now he's got an instructional over here that I can have streamed to this app on my phone. Like, so it's interesting to chase down these books, out of print books, and stuff still, like things I haven't acquired, and then older DVD instructional series. And then too, this like new, like the stream into the app, like, and again, like to see the transformation from like that era when you got involved streaming on YouTube to now, like, who do you want to see? Like, type in a black belt that you enjoy and see their whole game.
Yeah. It's changed tremendously. I mean, it's crazy how it's all at her fingertips. So, like, what is it? One of the books. So this is one of the books, one of the very first books that got me into the martial arts. And this was made in 1970. And this is like, so this is called Aikido and the Dynamic Sphere, right? Everyone has this book, right? And it's hilarious because when you look at it, it's got these like really kind of crappy pictures. But so Brian, to compare this book to Eddie Bravo's amazing colored pictures, like he really pushed it to the next level, because most of the martial art books look like this, these hand-drawn things, and these were really quite good for the time, but it also has kind of the philosophy. I really like reading text about martial arts. It's not just about the pictures. And a lot of people just like, oh, just show me the pictures or just show me the video. I don't want to know anything. I just want to know the technique. And for me, because I have a philosophy background, I want to know the philosophy of the martial arts and why things are the way they are, because I just find it interesting, right? So I'm a student of the martial arts in the history, like you.
Yeah. And too, I talk about this with people a lot. Like, you very rarely get people that are both. Like, I mean, there are only maybe there are, I think, 6 guys that were out there in the world when I was doing my thesis that were historians by trade, that were writing about martial arts. You just don't get a lot of that, right? So what I'm saying with that is it can be a fertile field for people like yourself or me, as somebody who, I obviously am going to have some biases because I'm a practitioner, but I'm also a trained historian, But that's something like that we really don't have a lot of people writing martial arts history that are historians, and it's something that's kind of always stood out to me. Is and what encouraged me to kind of go down that path, because you know, there's not a lot of people doing it, and that's kind of the angle on writing your thesis and everything. Like, what are you contributing that is not out there? But I do feel like that's an area where you get this. It's weird. There are some great books, but you get these picture books, and then you get like a book about the history of this guy's style, right? And it's a weird, and I've found some incredible books over the years. I mean, honorable mention, I'll say one of the most influential books, period. And a first book that was given to me by my instructor when I kind of went out on my own was The Tao of JKD.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just iconic. Like that's, it's been like a go-to. I pick something up all the time when I go to it. So, you know, but that's I really too love just like looking at all these books we're talking about too, like in a context of like they're a part of the history too. Like, and two, like who's even putting out books right now? Like these books we're talking about, like is anybody still doing them? You know?
And I think they should. So so Keith Owen, he just put out his latest book, From the Ground Up, which is it's like book, which is great. And I'm hoping. I hope my Japanese Jiu-Jitsu instructor, Steve Hisco, he actually writes a book. So he is he's carrying the torch of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu in Canada, like the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu journey from his dad and from their instructor, George Sylvain, and who was a cop and created this Jiu-Jitsu program from, in the 1940s and 1950s. It's really interesting, but this stuff will be lost unless its pen is put to paper. Because the problem is now many martial art practitioners are, show me the technique. I want to kick ass. I don't care where it comes from. Tradition sucks. And this is, it's all about the moves and how I can get my taps. I disagree with that because there's a wonderful thing you learn in reading about the history and understanding the art and talking to these old timers. It's amazing. Like, just listen to stories. It's so captivating. You talk to a guy like Pedro Sauer or Rickson Gracie, no one is saying anything. You're letting them talk and you're listening to these stories that are absolutely incredible. So.
But, to your point, just to kind of highlight both of y'all real quick, I think, it helps you understand the art better if you understand the people that made it. So like in Aikido is a good example. So the style Aikido that we did was called Tamiki Ryu, who was one of the students of Yoshiba, developed this Tamiki Ryu, and his system was principle based. So if you get in that, that's great. But if you understand who he was famous for breaking necks in Japan. So he loved the Shimanate to the chin. So when you study his style of Aikido, it's all about getting that hand in the face. Everything you do ends up with the hand in the face, and the throws are pretty, but he's like, I'm going to try to break your neck. So if you understand that from the privilege of where he comes from, his history and what he did, and he had a fundamental argument with Yoshiba, which was kind of interesting, over the teaching style of Aikido. So how you learn what you do and how you give information. His idea was I could teach you a few things and then you learn the whole system. And Yoshiba was more, no, we got to teach you everything. It's something's totally separate. So you got to know the whole thing to get proficient at it. So it's kind of interesting when you get in that philosophical, historical things. I think as a martial artist, if you don't understand the art you're practicing, the techniques are great. You lose a lot on the end of when you're trying to, especially regurgitate information to people to make them better.
Yeah. And Josh, was he a pre-war Yoshiba student or post-war? Do you know?
19.
Because Yoshiba's Aikido changed after the war, right? So you've got all his pre-war students who were quite tough, and then the post-war stuff where you got a little bit more like zen-y. And is your style kind of closer to Yoshinkan than Aikikai, or?
So I'm trying to think. He was in the 40s is when he started, and he came to. And when Shiba passed, it was him and his son had an argument. He split off from his son after Yoshiba passed. So I would say he's probably post-war. I have to check that out.
Okay.
To see what's going on.
Gotcha.
With that, I can't answer your question. I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah, I heard I read this the other day, but like about Kano taking some of his black belts to Yoshibas and like seeing Yoshiba's black belts work and like losing his mind, like, this is the greatest representation of jiu-jitsu ever, guys. And like a couple of his black belts were like, what do you mean? Like, what is this stuff we're doing? Right. And I kind of think about it this way. Like when I teach survey level history, which is all I teach, unfortunately. But it's like, I mean, we do this unit over Thomas Jefferson, the War 1812, and Andrew Jackson, but that was a whole class I took as an undergraduate, right? And if I was going to do a graduate project on it, it would be refined even further. Just like I think a lot of styles, you can take that away. Like, the sport rules, I think, have driven a lot of those stereotypes about, well, judo's throwing art, BJJ's a ground art, whatever. But, I also feel like certain styles, or even certain styles within styles, like you can glean a lot of very specialized work from that. Like, okay, yeah, we could talk about Thomas Jefferson in this way, or we could talk about him in this way, and go do a deep dive more versus like, okay, we're overviewing this in this amount of time, or and then we're on to the next thing, but where it's like an intense study. But anyway, that's just kind of like a metaphor. But I think that martial arts, I've just kind of viewed those in the same way, and I have always kind of looked at like, okay, well, we have we have Hickson. He's belted in judo. He's belted in aikido. He's obviously Helio Gracie's son. He's competed in tons of sambo tournaments, MMA. It's like obviously the man is well studied in the arts. Like has all this reverence for Japan, in the samurai culture. And I think that needs to be pushed more. I think that, and I've been guilty of it too. Like, oh well, your style sucks because MMA is better and Taekwondo's stupid, or karate, or whatever. Like I've been somewhat guilty of that myself, but through just like studying and learning about history and learning about different styles and studying different styles, you can't not appreciate everything that's out there. And, that's what I do like about some of the military guys that I've interacted with over the years. Have got like a broad-based, like they're doing some Filipino martial arts, they're doing some grappling with some gi tops on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you guys think there's anything that could be integrated process-wise? Again, I know the military has its problems. I actually dealt with writing some of that with my thesis, but do you think there's anything that law enforcement could take from the way the military is, or different militaries, not just within the United States or North America, but elsewhere? I mean, is there anything that could cross over?
So it depends on the goal of the department, right? So so adult learning styles, okay, if this is okay to talk about, right? So there's a thing called androgyny, which is when adults learn. So the police use what's called a behaviorist model when it comes to education, which is basically the lecture student model. So we stand up front, I lecture, we do this type of stuff, right? So if you want to, so police, when you do that, back in, it's a little history lesson, right? So the federal agencies came around in the 1920s and 1930s. Before that, you had a guy named Robert Peel, who's considered the father of modern policing. And he had what's called his 9 Peelian principles. In those principles, he has a statement. He says the police is the public and the public is the police, right? So it's a pretty profound statement if you think through it and think of what that means. And then in the 20s and the 30s, when it came into law enforcement change with the federal agencies, prohibition, a lot of stuff came into effect. And it became this thing where now the police weren't the public. The police's job was to control the public. Okay. And they transferred more to paramilitary style of training, and people came back from the war, brought that over, that type of training, and they brought that into law enforcement. And then we had this idea of community policing. And in the 90s, this was the big push, community policing, and they developed what they call the 6 pillars of foundational policing, right, for the 21st century. So they did this, and so there was a shift where you're trying to go from this law enforcement. So they're going from Peelian principles back to law enforcement, and then back to this idea of community policing. Well, the thing about community policing, which is kind of a buzzword if you want to go that, it takes a high level of critical thinking to be a community policing, right? Really, with law enforcement, I can tell you the laws. I want you to write tickets for everybody that runs a red light. You go do that, great. But if you want someone to enforce laws and be a police officer, You need someone that has a really high level of critical thinking and the ability to make decisions, right? They need to be able to be given a problem that's in the community, whether it's a drug problem, it's a kids don't cross the street correctly, you know, whatever you're trying to solve, partner with the community to fix that problem. That takes a high level of critical thinking. It's not just going out, stopping a car and writing a citation. So one of the things we find, and there's lots of studies on this, I can provide them. One of the most influential was a guy named, I can't say his name, is Brizer. He wrote this in 2003. It was a study on law enforcement training and what it does for you. And basically the conclusion was, which was pretty interesting, is that our current behaviorist model produces law enforcement officers that can perform tasks on the job, but don't have the necessary facilities to be a critical thinker. So if you change to what's called an androgynical model or androgyny model for law enforcement training, you can develop critical thinkers that can do that. And that's the method we use now. And so basically it's a student-led learning process that's facilitated by an instructor. One of the reasons we don't see it in our profession, though, is because of the resources it takes to run that. If I have an academy of 50 students going through, I need to triple my training staff to facilitate that model for instruction, right? And so getting back to your original question, as far as policing is concerned, you know, if you're going to make a shift or make a change in our culture, you've got to change the way we train and how we present information and what we do. So if you want to go from integration of, I want my officers to do this, that's great. Behaviorist model has a place. Androgyny model has a place too as well, but you got to have both of them working hand in hand. And there's tons of studies out there for adult learning theory, right? They're just too busy trying to teach cops the same way we teach kindergartners, right?
Yep.
So you've got to change that and change the way we teach officers and train officers so they can develop the skills they need to do the job better. And so if you integrate some of that stuff in there, I mean, that's a great idea. It works out perfect. You just got to be able to have an instructor that understands adult learning, because right now in our profession, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in Arkansas, if you're going to be an instructor, you go to a week training for 40 hours, you come out 3 years on the job, you can be a certified instructor. And as long as you take a class on it, you can teach it.
I think that's probably one of the best explanations of learning styles in policing I've ever heard. That's fantastic. And I'm totally going to crop that and put it on our Invictus thing later, because it is true. And one of the things I also think that you kind of touched upon is that we are so used to parroting information. Teach me, I regurgitate, right? And we know that doesn't work. So conceptual learning is really important. And this isn't come back to the martial arts a little bit. When you produce a black belt, Brian, and automatically people say, well, if you're a black belt, you're a wonderful teacher. And we know that that's not the case. And you need to teach people how to teach. That is where it's at. And so my goal in the martial arts is I want to try to be the best teacher I can be. I know I'm not going to be a world champion. I know I'm not going to win the big ones or anything like that. And it doesn't matter to me because that's not why I'm in it. So when I'm producing students, I also want to see them be able to teach concepts and become wonderful teachers. So there's a smooth transition. The worst thing is being in the room, and I've been to a lot of these seminars where very, very skilled practitioners unable to get their point across because they don't understand the concept of teaching, or they understand teaching one type of person like themselves. They have to be able to change, right? It's like, well, I understand, I'm not a big person, or I'm not a world champion, or I don't understand what you're talking about here. They can't adapt. You have to be able to adapt. So.
Well, I think too, this is something that I've run into. It's like, is an instructor, there's this weird dichotomy between what the things that I want to do, that I do, that are part of my game or that I want to be teaching. And then there's like what the students need. And I'm constantly going over things, every single day, that it might not have anything to do with me. I might not be anything that I'm super interested in covering or even use personally, but I see the value of that technique overall for, a wider variety of people. And then I came at this way of thinking much later in training, but it's like, yeah, well, what about the person you run into that does know that? And I think a good analogy for like law enforcement would be like, what about that high school wrestler who is overpowering and can clinch you and belly to back you or something, and just, you never know what you're going to run into. So it's like, train everything for that reason, for for the person that you do encounter that they, they have a technique that you avoided because it wasn't a part of your game, or it wasn't a part of your coach's game, et cetera. I think that's something that's always kind of stuck out to me, is like, I was trying to balance what my students need with everything else.
So I have a question just to kind of throw it out there. So first off, Brian is probably one of the best coaches I've ever seen. I'm just gonna throw that out there so you know that, area. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up anything, but at the end of the day, like, he coaches really well because he can tell me a set of information, but then he can tell us, and me as a purple belt, he tells it one way, but then he'll tell it different to a white belt, right? And it's the same information, but it translates well across both levels. And the white belt might be half my size, which happens all the time. So anyways, he's transferring it to his body type and what he does, and he can make adjustments on the fly as far as what that means. Like, if you're this small, you're gonna do this. If you're this big, you'll do this. This is changes. It's good. So have you ever done any work like with the programming and neural pathways and what that looks like for police, what that looks like for jiu-jitsu practitioners, and how do you do that without overloading people's ability to retain information and program those neural pathways to make them does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it comes down to understanding how human nature and how people learn. So you have to be a student of knowing how people learn. And there are different learning styles. There's kinetic, there's visual, there's audio. So we all know that. So identifying that immediately is the mark of a good coach. And that adaptability is key. And like I said, some people have blinders on, Josh, and they can't see it, and they can only teach one way. And they try to apply the purple belt concept to the white belt, and the white belt's not going to understand it. So it's understanding those different learning styles, I think, is important. And that takes study. It takes experience and study. And a lot of people don't want to invest time into learning how to teach, which blows my mind.
I'll tell you a great book that I really enjoyed here, and it was because of Brian that I found it. The Art of Learning by Joshua McMillian was real good, but he has a book list he lists on his website, The Art of Learning, called The Talent Code, about coaching and how you develop really strong practitioners in a short amount of time for your different thing, and why certain areas. And the guy basically, he studied what we call a hotbed. Like, why does Brazil produce the best soccer players? Why does Russia produce the best tennis players, right? So if you got 20 national champions and 6 are coming from this one city in Russia, why is that? And so it's a pretty interesting book on that. But at the end of the day, he talked a lot about, it boils down to who your coach is. And it was talking about the person that coaches you, how he coaches you, deep practice, how you do it, and that transmission information was so critical. And then the other thing was it's a book called Building Shooters. It was really good, but it was a breakdown of neural pathways. And I think when we talk about it for law enforcement, we talk about this idea that, there's 5 major pathways we have to program. Okay. The problem with our profession is we spend all time for programming this mechanical pathway. Like, this is a firearm. This is how you reload it. And so we do this the whole time, but we forget to program the pathway. Like, okay, when do I pull the trigger? There's a paper target. When do I make a decision to pull the trigger? And how do you program that pathway? And people have ability not to retain information. And so in jiu-jitsu, just watching Brian coach and what he does, he programs his neural pathways real well because he gives people the opportunity to do it, then drill the hell out of it and get better. So I do enjoy that as far as art concerned. I have no idea where I was going with that. I think I'm just trying to sound intelligent with you guys that are like doctors and what you do, and I'm a local.
Yeah, we're stumbling through it like everyone else.
Yeah,
and this is great conversation though. And I mean, yeah, are you familiar with Josh Waiskin, Ari?
I'm not. No.
He's a Marcel. I didn't find this out until much later. He's a Marcel Garcia black belt. He's the guy who designed MG in Action. He's co-owner of Marcelo's gym.
Oh, that's him. Yes. Okay.
The chess world champion from a little boy, Bobby Fischer, searching for Bobby Fischer, finding Bobby Fischer.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic read. I listened to it twice in the last year on Audible, and he does several of the books on his list I've also listened to, and they're great. But for anybody listening, that is somebody I tell people about a lot. Like, what a fascinating guy. And he was into Tai Chi and like at the highest level before he got into jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. It's crazy. One of the things I actually wanted to say was talking, because obviously COVID has affected all Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms and training. And a lot of people have not trained in a year. my training has fallen off considerably, and I'm finally getting back to it. And I'm admitting that. Like a lot of people don't want to admit it. It's like, no, they've been training hard, or they're doing underground. I wish I was doing underground training, right? I built a gym on my house now. Like I literally have a dojo in my house. So, because I closed my academy, and I need to train. So how was I keeping up with training? And it's visualization. And so they talk about this with professional athletes, like visualization is super important, because the body doesn't know, right? You can trick, the mind is basically tricking the body that you're going through these motions. And that's why professional athletes visualize winning, scoring the goal. Coming down the ice and scoring the goal like 1,000 times. And then when it happens, it's natural. So that's how I have been trying to keep in the game. I've been visualizing jiu-jitsu. I think about use of force all the time. I think about getting out of my car and what's going to happen, and scenario-based stuff. I'm constantly going through those motions. So when it happens, hopefully I'm prepared. I know my body is going to be lagging a little bit because it's not in jiu-jitsu shape anymore, but that was one way that I kept on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, visualization is so important. When I was competing a lot, it was something I focused on, and it's something you hear some of the greatest minds out there talk about, whether they're athletes or coaches or just kind of, I guess, your motivational speaker types, But that is, I mean, visualization, and I think that goes into things beyond just jiu-jitsu. Like, I'm further past some things that I visualize, but everything that I have going on started as an idea, right? It started as a vision, and it just grew from there. Like whether that's a podcast or, granted, again, in uncharted territories, in a lot of areas, right? Like, I didn't visualize this turning into that. So what comes next? I mean, but visualization, I noticed that. Like, what's fascinating to me is sometimes people will take a few weeks off for an injury.
Yep.
And then when they come back, they're on fire. Like sometimes you suck, right? Sometimes nothing goes right and you hurt yourself again, right? Yep. Like, oh, my shoulder's better, but my elbow, right? But it is weird how, like, sometimes people take 3-4 weeks off. I've been that guy myself. And you come in and you are on fire, like your movements are on. And I too noticed that, like, it's the mistakes I fix are the ones that I thought about when I was not here, when I was not at the gym, when I was at home. And I encourage my students to do that all the time. I'm like, the problem you had today, like, you got to think about it before you come back, whatever it is. Like, that's part of it. Like, you got to go do this mental work outside of here. Like, you're not just stand in front of the bag and I'll fix it next time I'm in practice and when I'm standing in front of the bag. Like, no, it's going to take more mental work than that, right? It's going to take you visualizing, like, okay, if I do this, I could get knocked out, right? Like, I don't need to do that. Like, let's think through, like, what I need to do instead. And I try to encourage that. I mean, and I think that that's like a part of the process, and a part of visualization is getting people doing that outside of their normal training regimen. Like the mental, I've always had a saying, the mental rep counts.
Yes.
Right? Like, it does. That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Do the work. You got to do the work.
So what I find interesting, so y'all both black belts in jiu-jitsu, right? So, like, when Brian watches a video, I know he can watch the guy do the technique and go, okay, that's cool, let's train. Then some of us have to watch it like 30 times and go, I didn't see what Brian saw, right? I didn't see what Ari saw when he did it, right? Because y'all got the mental reps. But also when y'all are doing your mental reps, I think it's different than if someone that's a white belt's doing it, because you've had so many people grapple with you, so many times you've been in those situations. You can visualize different body types, visualize different feels, and work through that problem on different areas, such a higher level than a lot of us people have been doing it as long is. But that visualization has been cool, especially in law enforcement. Like, visualize, if I go to a convenience store and a guy's robbing with a gun, this is what I'm going to do, right? This is what's going to happen. But y'all's visualization skills are probably a little higher than I would say a normal person is, it seems.
It's really funny, and coaches always run into this. When you get to a level, and we all do it, we all make mistakes when we coach. And it's your ability to cover up the mistake to make sure that no one noticed that you made the mistake. But when you're a teacher and you see another teacher make a mistake and they cover it up, you're like, oh, they totally fucked that up and that's wrong, but they recovered. So you actually appreciate the cover up that they've moved on to the next thing. But we know, right? But the white belts are going, oh wow, blowing my mind. And sometimes we're in the middle of a technique and you're doing something and you're kind of going with the flow and you're like, oh, this is not working. And I wonder if anyone's noticing. I'm going to change it right on the fly right now.
That is so true. I used to get hung up on, I'd be like, well, he showed it a different way that time. Like, wait, he didn't do that one thing. Like, and then you like miss out on the whole technique that's being shown because you're ripping it apart. Like, he's doing it a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just have to be humble and be honest about it. Like I said this recently, like I'm at a stage now that I'm admitting my mistakes. I screw up all the time. I'm just trying to get better. Time is ticking. I've got more days behind me than I probably have in front of me now. So I am trying to make the most out of my life. And part of that is just admitting that we make mistakes. So
I think, maybe Kurt Osiander said this. I don't know who said it. Yeah. But I once I heard it, it was a little easier for me. But it's like, you train with a bunch of, if you're training a bunch of snakes, you're gonna get bitten, and you are training people to, around you, like over the years, just training with these guys. It's like those are the guys that are gonna catch me and submit me, and that's okay. Right? Like it not making it a contest as an instructor, but it's like, cause I said this on Facebook the other day, it's like, we have more black belts in my academy than there were in the state I live in when I started training, and it's like, those people are incredible practitioners. Yeah. And, they push me to new levels, just like, me being the coach or whatever, I'm bringing in new stuff, but it's like, man, all the time I am like, hey, show me how you did that. Like it's super cool to be able to hit that. Everybody in the gym having like a high level that's around me too, like so many individuals. My wife's even a black belt now. So yeah, it's awesome.
The job of a coach is to teach your students how to defeat you. That is the job of a coach. And if you are keeping information from them, then you're doing a disservice, right? You want your students to beat you. That's how it should be. And
they think the Aikido's stupid, so it's easy to keep it from them. You know what I'm saying? They don't even want to know it. Or the judo, really. So, but we force some of it on them for sure. For sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, man, Ari, it's been great catching up, man. Anything else you wanna get into before we wrap up?
No, I just hopefully cops are listening to this will jump over and find us on Instagram. So here's my plug, right? So they can find us at Invictus Leo official or invictusleo.com, which is our website. So hopefully more people join. We have a private Facebook group too, which has 1,700 members now, and it's all discussion about jiu-jitsu and policing and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. And, we'll keep pushing forward. So I honestly really appreciate when people take the time to listen to me talk about this stuff, because it needs to be out there, and I'm not going to stop until I'm dead. And mark my words, I'm going to say it on your podcast, that in the next couple years, you're going to see a fundamental shift amongst policing and jiu-jitsu and use of force in the country, because there's way more people doing it.
Awesome. I'm here for it, man. And always a pleasure, Ari. Again, thanks for taking the time. It's awesome to get to sit down and talk with you about martial arts, about stuff we're all passionate about. So hopefully this won't be the last time.
Cool. Thanks, my friend.
All right, bro. Have a great one.
Yeah.